On today's episode of the podcast, Matthew shares his experience navigating the publishing world, including how to watch for potential predatory publishers. Also, you will get the privilege of hearing an excerpt from Matthew's story and novel of the same name as it stands. This is the Brewing Fiction Podcast. Do you have a particular author, let's say, influence your writing style?
So a lot of people have told me that sometimes I use very flowery language and things, but I think that's because I'm kind of more of a fan of like old-timey writers. Like I love Lovecraft, I love Edgar Allan Poe. I'm also a big Charles Dickens fan, which completely unrelated to horror, and then I'm also a really big Gabriel Garcia Marquez fan. He's the guy who wrote 100 Years of Solitude, which is what I would consider to be my favorite book of all time.
Wow.
But a lot of them write in like this very strong imagery. They're not afraid to use like larger, bigger words that sometimes you got to stop and look something up. Which to me, if you're going to read something and enjoy it and you're also going to learn, some new vocabulary, by all means, I don't see an issue with that. Some people take offense to that. Some people are like, how dare you use, these
a word that I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. How dare you use these synonyms and other things? And why can't you just write it more simply and like this and like that? And it's like, well, I know that's the way that Hemingway would have done it, but that's not my cup of tea. But
style is style, though, right? Yeah,
exactly. And that's like, for example, with Edgar Allan Poe, I had a heck of a lot of fun with during COVID. He's got the story, The Mask of the Red Death, which is about people throwing a party during the time of tuberculosis when, people weren't supposed to be getting and gathering together. So I was like,
right.
You know what? It's COVID. This would be a perfect time to do a reimagining of that story. I'm going to write that story. And then I was like, how would Edgar Allan Poe write this story? I'm going to drink a bunch of wine. So I wrote that story, had a blast doing it. And I was like, all right. Submit it to like a random publisher who was looking for an anthology series of quote unquote like Gothic stuff. Yeah. And in the Gothic description, they included Poe. So I was like, all right, this is perfect. And they were like, we love your story. We're going to put it in our collection. And I was like, awesome.
Wow. So how many publishers, have you worked with or are you working with?
So I have, and I'm still working with Fairfield Scribes.
Yeah.
Coalescence Publishing are the people that primarily do all of like my paperbacks and, ebooks and stuff.
Right.
The anthology I just mentioned, which is The Witch's Ball, that was Quill and Crow Publishing along with Jazz House Publications.
Okay.
And then the only other one that I've worked with was Weird World Press. They did the High Strange magazine, which unfortunately is defunct now due to monetary issues. They couldn't keep it going. But I loved writing for them because they were a fun group.
Yeah.
Everybody was like a paranormal researcher or a medium or something. And so they would write this magazine and I would write, crazy stories, give them the stories. And they would literally introduce me by being like, all right, and now a break from the truth. Here's some fiction from Matthew Salinas. And I'd be like, oh, all right, I'm a fiction writer, huh?
So all of these different publishers randomly picked you up from all your submissions or, with a new writer asking this question, when you discovered Fairfield Scribes, does that lead into some of these other ones? Or are these all random for you?
That's a very good question. So they are kind of random, but in a way, I think what really helped is with getting my work out there and somebody saying yes, it kind of bolsters your confidence. And with that, you get that whole, well, I must be doing something right. Because, when in the beginning, when you're starting out and you get all those rejections, it can be a little heartbreaking, a little rough, because, you pour your heart and your soul, your time and your effort into something. And for somebody to tell you, oh, it's not the best fit, or it's not quite up to our standards, we don't really want it, it hurts a little bit. And it can kind of put you in that mindset of, well, why am I writing? Why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah.
And so it's really good that every once in a while you get those boons of like, all right, this person liked something. All right, I'm going to go find somebody else that likes something.
And you're rejuvenated for a few stories.
Exactly. Yeah. Or you write something personally and you're like, wow, I really like this. I don't care what other people say.
Right.
Yeah, and so, it was all more or less, I think, just random, really lucky that, I was in the right place at the right time. I think the only people that actually reached out to me were the High Strange magazine editor, Renee Decker. She had read some of my stuff and she just reached out to me and was like, hey, I like your writing style. I like the way you kind of do things. Would you be interested in writing for a magazine? We can't really pay you for it. But I was like, all right, it's another publication under my belt.
Get it out.
That's another thing too is, a lot of people equate success with monetary value. And I feel like in a creative sense, that's not really the healthiest mindset or the most important thing. Like at no point have I sat down and been like, all right, I'm going to write this, I'm going to get it published, and I'm just going to watch money roll in.
Right.
Like that's not the mindset I go into with this. It's more of like, all right, I've written something. It's very important to me. I'm sure that I am not of the most esoteric mindset that only I'm going to be the only person that's going to enjoy this or find something, important about this. Right. So I'd like to get it out there, see how people react. And then a good thing too is, it's always a learning experience. Like we were kind of talking about before, you can find things of like, all right, well, this worked. People liked this. People hated this. And then you're like, okay, I'm starting to, you find your voice, you find your style, you find the demographic of people who kind of like what you're writing. And from there, I feel you can kind of figure out a lot more about who you are, not only as just an author and a writer, but also just what's important to you, I guess.
Nice. So that's all part of the growth process and developing your style, who you are as a writer.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Awesome. That's great advice for anybody who's starting out. Do you have a lot of unpublished and half finished, quarter finished work?
So I do have a big briefcase that I kind of consider to be my quote unquote graveyard.
Yeah.
Of like, I've started things and I have either been like, all right, this isn't working out. Like, it's a good idea, but I got to table this for now. And every once in a while, I'll open up the briefcase and be like, oh, hey, maybe I'll use this for a short story or something. But, I write very sporadically, and sometimes I'm in a mindset of, I'm going to write this, and then I fall off from writing that because I also am very easily distracted, and I'm like, oh, shiny new idea. Let's pursue that.
Right.
But currently, so for NaNoWriMo last year, for Coalescence Publishing, we all wrote a 50,000 words or more fantasy series stories that are connected in the same world. So I have that is just kind of sitting in limbo. I wrote a personal memoir about my life that is also kind of just sitting around. And then I have a full-length novel that also is more of just like general fantasy / fiction that I have that's kind of just sitting out there too, called A House on the Horizon. And that one, I think that one is going to be one of the later on things that I ever get published because it's a very important story to me. Wrote it, and one of the things that I used to do, but I don't do anymore because I don't have the time for it, is I actually hand wrote it out because I feel that way you get more of a connection to what you're writing. You think about your word choice and everything.
I've heard
and
that
then
before.
I typed it up, and then I went back and I did handwritten edits on the manuscript after I printed out everything I typed. And then I went back in and then I retyped exactly. Like I've because a couple of times too, I felt really good about it, and I may or may have not told people that it was my magnum opus. Maybe prematurely. So now I'm like, oh crap, this really has to be good.
So you got a few more edits to go, it sounds like.
Exactly. But that one was really cool. It was essentially, I wrote this story about what would it be like if there was this family on the outside of society, not only in their personal relationship with the people they live in the town with, but also literally they live on the edge of town. But they're this strange group. Nobody knows about them. They're kind of like an urban legend in a sense. None of them age. They all just live in this house that's more or less kind of like a magical house, keeps them young forever. Yeah. But in addition to that, they all have these weird gifts. And none of them necessarily know why they have these weird gifts until it slowly starts to come to light that, like, okay, this actually isn't like, gifts per se in the usual good sense. Like, you may also consider them to be curses based off of how everything developed the way that it is. And then you find out that they're not the only members of this family. There's other members of the family that are like elsewhere that have other things going on. And then there's just this poor, completely innocent, inconspicuous child just living in the town who one day is like, well, I'm going to go kind of check it out because, there's this girl, I want to impress her and I want to be brave. So I'm going to go over to this weird house and check it out. And it's like, sure enough, now he's unrevocably intertwined with all of this crazy, magical stuff going on. And it's like, oh man, what have I gotten myself into? But I'm very excited for that one to see the light of day. I think that'll be super cool.
It sounds super cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So in your 3 years, have you ever stumbled into writer's block, if that exists? Some say it doesn't exist, but have you ever had an issue where nothing was coming to you?
Sometimes I have issues where I'll write and then I'll look at what I've written and I'll be like, nope. That's just not going to work.
That's
and it's
like,
well,
case.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, well, I've wasted time on that.
Yeah.
But my number one thing to combat writer's block, because sometimes it is hard to progress a particular narrative or story or something, is that always have a contingency plan. So if you're writing one story, don't be afraid to have something else going on in the back. Because that way, if you need to, because sometimes you'll have those days where you're feeling very creative and you're like, all right, I'm going to write this. Maybe I'm going to write a little bit of that. Other days it's more of a struggle and it's like, I can't quite do this one thing. Well, maybe I'll try this other one. And if that doesn't work, maybe I'll try this other thing. Because the way I look at it is, even if you're writing and it's not necessarily going anywhere, you're at least still going through the writing. You're honing your craft. You're working on developing your narrative, your characters, your voice, things like that. And at the end of the day, the more polished you are with your own craft, the more polished your work is going to seem.
Okay.
So, even if you are just writing for the sake of writing, I feel like there's still merit in that. And so I feel like that's kind of my mindset when it comes to writer's block.
Nice. Great advice. And do you find it exhausting or energizing when you're writing?
Both. Some days I'm just fueled up and I'm like, I could keep writing forever, but I need to get to sleep or I'm going to be dead tomorrow. And other days it's just like, all right, I've written 5 lines of prose. I'm beat. This is all I got. I need to take a nap.
All right. So because you've done both sides of the publishing specter here, what advice do you give aspiring authors like myself about publishing?
The number one thing I would say is, and I hate that I have to say this, but I've mentioned it in a lot of other podcasts too, is make sure to watch out for predatory publishing companies. There are so many companies out there, and legally I believe you're not allowed to call them out by name so I won't do that. But essentially there are some companies that will be like, oh, we believe in you 100%. You're going to be like the next best-selling author for our publishing house. We would love to publish you. And you're like, okay, cool. And they're like, yeah, we just need $5,000. Or, oh, well, we just, we'll go halves on it. So if you give us like $2,500 or you give us this or you give us that, and it's like, do you really believe in any of the authors you sign then? Because it sounds to me like you're just like, all right, we're just going to get our money up front, and then no matter what happens to that book, we're still getting paid.
Yeah, no doubt. Is that a legitimate publishing houses and publishers? Is that normal to ask upfront? A new author here, right? And I want to roll some stories out there and some manuscripts. Are there legitimate publishers that are going to say yes, but we're going to need dollars? Is that normal?
I would say for the most part, unfortunately, it's normal in a sense that those publishers, I would say, are more of like vanity, or as they also call them, boutique publishers.
Okay.
Or sometimes they call them hybrid publishers. Those ones, I'd say, I feel don't have much literary merit, and they don't really care about authors in this sense.
Yeah.
I feel like they know that if you're a new author, you're getting out into the world. Some people are more desperate than others just to see their work, out there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so they're willing to do pretty much anything. And if you feed into that and you tell them like, oh yeah, we're going to make a star out of you, people are going to be like, oh, all right. Like, yeah, I'll do whatever it takes to, get my name out there and do what I want to do. And like I said, it's predatory in a way. And I think that that's really rotten that people do that. But that's honestly one of the main reasons why I went with Coalescence Publishing. Like, them, along with a lot of the other like small indie studios that I talked to, were like, oh no, no, we pay you. That's the only way this works.
Nice.
Like if you sign with us, yes, we're the ones who hold, like the copyrights and, the intellectual property for as long as you're signed with us, and you can't like go off and, sell the works that we have published under your own name and stuff like that.
Right.
But they're not going to take, they're not just going to take the money right out of your pockets. Yes, as with any traditional publishing, you're going to split your royalties with anybody.
Yeah.
But that's just the name of the game.
Good to know. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm sure there's going to be listeners who are right at that point, and it's important to hear that from people like yourself who've been through it.
Yeah, if something doesn't vibe with you, or you feel like something is suspicious about a publishing company, I'd say really, take a step back and think about what exactly you're getting into before you make any final decisions.
Great advice. All right. So have you ever written under a pseudonym, or have you ever thought of it?
I have a few times. It's usually when I'm doing something like really, really weird or out there.
A little bit away from the style that is typically yours, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. And so every once in a while I will, but usually that's like self-published stuff. And for the most part, I'm just being me. I'm just being weird. I'm just writing stuff, and I'm like, most people probably aren't going to enjoy this, but maybe a couple of people will read this and be like, oh, all right, that's cool.
Cool. All right. And what about tools? So, I mean, there's so many apps and programs and different advice online. I know there's Google Docs, there's Word, there's all these other things that you can get for free, but there's also a lot of paid programs. Do you have any tools, or did you start with tools that you would recommend, or you no longer recommend, or do you have anything that you use?
This is a really good question. Honestly, I have a lot of tools at my disposal. Like, people are like, oh, we've got Word Anvil, we've got this, we've got Atticus for formatting, we've got this other thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's too much. Like,
it is
Yeah, my wife will be the first one to tell you too. When it comes to apps, even downloading them on my phone, I'm like, is there another way? Is there another way I can do this without having to get more technology?
Right.
So outside of writing just in like plain old Google Docs, the only other thing I use is the free version of Grammarly.
Right. Gotcha.
Just because my grammar is atrocious. My wife can also attest to that. Also, she is a grammar teacher, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so she.
Well, that's good, but.
So she is an invaluable resource for both grammar as well as just like helping my imagination and my thought process. She's super supportive and spectacular in that way. But
Nice.
yeah, but just the free version of Grammarly gets the job done.
Does the job. Yeah.
Yeah, it lets you
Yeah.
know if your verb tenses are messed up, or if you could clean something up, or hey, this is a run-on sentence, or you forgot that comma there.
Yeah, yeah. I have Grammarly, the free version, but I use Hemingway Editor, which is, you can download the program, but I just use online. So it's online
Gotcha.
and it double checks what Grammarly does as well. And sometimes finds different things too, right? So, but yeah, I like free. I mean, everything that I do, I like to keep it a low cost as possible, right? So
Yeah, I mean
$100 maybe
that's
it would
also
be.
too why I'm a huge fan of good old, spell and grammar check, just in
Yeah,
Google Docs.
yeah, right.
Yeah,
That's the first level before. I mean, that'll get you to finish your story long before you ever need to really dive in and edit it, right?
exactly.
And you edit your own work, so your publisher does editing and stuff for you. Is that correct? Once you send it to them,
Yeah, so once I get it as polished as I can between like Grammarly and having my wife help
and
with
your wife,
stuff,
yeah.
yeah, I'll send it on over to the publisher, and then there's a whole team of editors. They'll go through and they'll do like line by line edits, and then they'll put the comments in the section of Google Docs, and it'll be all highlighted. And then I'll usually sit down with one of the editors, and we'll go through everything. And I really like that too, because it can be a very good thought process of, even though they suggest edits, I'm not beholden to any of them. So sometimes I'll explain something that I'm better at articulating verbally, and they'll be like, all right, well, if that's what you're trying to do, like try doing this, because that'll work better
Okay.
than what you did.
Yeah.
And then sometimes too, I am also a stubborn person, and I'll just be like, we're not changing that.
That's
Yeah, like, I'm
it.
sorry, but that's important to me. Like, I hate to do this, but no. Like, nope, this is what we're doing.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Or other times they'll be like, this doesn't work, get rid of it. And sometimes I'll sit there and I'll be like, man, but I did all this writing and then I'm like, all right,
You're
fine,
so
whatever.
yeah.
Yeah. Like, all right, you're right. Get rid of it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. I'm just going to give you a minute or two. If you had something that you'd like to share, I would love to give you a few minutes to maybe read a little something. So, you know what? If you would like, I'll give you a couple minutes to read a piece.
Yeah. So I've got the beginning of the story as it stands. That is from the collection that, it's titled after it, As It Stands.
Yeah.
And so I figured I'd start with the beginning of that short story. And, I feel like that's as good of any place to start.
I love it.
All right, so here we go. On Washington Street, an obelisk stands, watching the traffic. Its oblong shape, darker than pitch. It would be an eyesore to any realtor trying to sell property in the area. Yet its presence in the Sunliner subdivision wasn't tied to any specific date or event. It had simply appeared one day, and since then it had remained unchanged. The dark reflective surface seemed to observe the residents as they went about their daily routines. This obelisk, a symbol of immense power and destruction, stood where an old Victorian house once did. But the detail that disturbed me the most was its invisibility to others. Only I could see it. When I brought up its existence at a town hall meeting, the attendees laughed. Foolish old Frederick Williams, they mocked. Others whispered behind my back. A sad, paranoid man with delusions that keep him isolated. But their insults held no weight. I knew the obelisk was real, and I was convinced others saw it too. Those who labeled me delusional, who pointed fingers and snickered, they were simply trying to discredit me. By painting me as unhinged, they hoped to overshadow the bizarre events happening in town. I have to admit, their scheme was cruel, but effective. However, I was undeterred in my quest for the truth. 2 weeks ago, on a stormy evening, I watched the obelisk from my attic window. Neither wind nor rain affected it, but when lightning struck its peak, the scene transformed. 13 glowing orbs, each housing a grotesque eye of unsettling hues, appeared in concentric circles around the top. In that burst of light, our gazes met, and ever since, they've whispered to me during the darkest hours. Through the stillness of the night, they shared their names and unveiled their mission. We serve the ancient Yog-Sothoth, they murmured. Consider yourself blessed. for your town has been selected for our ritual. And in mere days his majesty and his consort shall descend upon you along with the great mother. The order will offer their sacrifice, and in return we will grant their desires. As the orbs pulsed with unholy light, their message was clear. They needn't say any more. Doubt me if you wish. Label me mad or unstable, but I am certain of what I witnessed. Another flash of lightning and the orbs vanished, yet the obelisk's attention seemed sharper, its watchful presence pursuing me no matter where I was in town or even within my home. Since that night I've barely managed any hours of sleep. I dread closing my eyes. Vulnerability lurks in slumber. Once, when sleep overtook me, I woke to a chilling sight. Etched into the flesh of my left arm were the names of the orbs.
As it stands.
Yep, as it stands.
And is that just the first chapter of what, a short story or a full novel?
That is one of the short stories of the book. It's a collection of 13 of them. That is just the beginning of the intro before I get too much into the meat and potatoes of it. So yeah. I figured I'd leave it with a little bit of a cliffhanger to, make it more interesting.
It was that, absolutely. And thank you. So where can our listeners find your work now? We'll end on that note.
Yeah, well, you can find it at the Coalescence Publishing website, which is, you can just Google Coalescence Publishing and you'll find us. Also available on Amazon, and I've got a couple of things available on Barnes & Noble as well.
Are those all independent? So your work with Coalescence, does it have to be purchased through them, or is it on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or how does that whole thing work?
They distribute it everywhere. So, okay. It's all done through them, but outside of our actual publishing website, the one downside is anywhere else you put it, they do tend to take a bit of the cut of the royalties.
Fair, yeah.
And Amazon's the worst when it comes to that.
Good to know. Matthew, this has been a pleasure. I appreciate your time. Your style is something that definitely appeals to me, and I'm sure there are going to be listeners who are quite intrigued with the work you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a wonderful time doing this. This was a great podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And with that, I'll bid you goodbye, and we'll chat again soon.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Join us next week on the Brewing Fiction Podcast for some bonus episodes with Newfoundland and Labrador author John W. Goodland. To coincide with John's release of his fourth novel, Estate Secrets, the podcast will feature our chat with John. Take a listen to get an idea of who he is as a writer and what you can expect to read in his books. Then, next Sunday, with our normal release, Heather returns to the show as we welcome science fiction and fantasy writer Hannah Greer. There's lots brewing here on the Brewing Fiction Podcast. Stop by the podcast homepage for links to today's guest and to see what else is brewing on the Brewing Fiction Podcast. You can find the links in the description. And don't forget to click the subscribe button to be notified whenever a new episode is released.